How are you?
Hi, okay, thank God. How are you?
Hey, great. Thanks a lot. I needed that.
No problem.
So before we start on Kuf Gimel, let's take a look on the bottom of Kuf Beis, Amid Beis. And we're studying now the sheet of Rava, who holds that there's something called anfilia, which is something that you wrap around your feet. It's not a full-fledged shoe. And the question is whether it's made of or of beged, if it's made of cloth or of leather. If it's made of leather, then the chalitza with an anfilia is kosher. And that's asuya mi'ar. But if it's anfilia with beged, made of beged, then it's not called a minol, and it's a chalitza psula. It's invalid. And the Brisa now is going to support Rav. The Brisa says, Cholta b'minal hanifram, to have a shoe that was torn. And so the place where they sewed the shoe up was completely ripped. And this is above the foot, so that now his foot is exposed. Shechofe es rov haregel. At this part of the shoe would normally cover his entire, or shall we say, most of his regel. And even though he ripped it, it still covers most of his foot, and the rip is only in a minority of his foot. So in these cases, the chalitza, as we'll see, is kshera b'diavad. The second case is sandal hanifchas. You have a shoe that's missing a piece of its leather. Shemekabel esrov hareg, but yet it still has enough to receive most of the foot. And once again, b'diavad, it's going to be okay. Next case is a sandal shel sham v'shel siv. This is a shoe that's made of wood, or it's made of some sort of a wax, or sieve is the he says here, something, made from a kind of a strong substance. Now we have kav hakitea. Kitea is unfortunately someone who has no leg. His leg was amputated. He's an amputee. And they add a fake leg, which has like a shape of a leg, and it's either made of wood or sometimes it's made of another substance, but it has a receptacle to receive a regel, which is again gemin regel. So he doesn't lean on the kav itself, but he needs a mashenet, something to hold up this stump of a leg, what's ever left of his leg. Now we have the mok or muk, which is some sort of a sandal that's made of a strong substance that protects his foot. Then we have smichas haraglayim, a person who has legs, but he can't walk on those legs. So he moves his body with his arms as he drags his legs over the ground, and to make sure that his legs are not soiled by the concrete of the floor of the ground. Then he puts his feet into these what's called smichas, or almost like a blanket, but it's made of leather. Vanfilia shel or. or this case of anfilia, which we said is a kind of a slipper or a galash, and it's made of or. Ve'acholetzes min hagadol. So the yavam is a gadol. And then here on the top of Kuf Gimel Amid Aleph, Bein Omed, Bein Yoshe, Bein Muter. It matters not whether the chalitu is done when the yavam or the yavam both were standing or sitting or leaning. Vacholetzes min hasuma chalitzasa kshera. So if the yavam is blind, Nebuch, and she does the chalitza removing his shoe, then the chalitza is kshera. And now the Brisa goes ahead and lists those cases in contrast to the Recha that here in the Sefer Apostle. Avol b'minal hanifram she'ein chofes rosh haregel. If as a result of the fact that the shoe is torn, it no longer covers most of his leg. So if the Yavam would try to walk in it, it would fall off. Or sandal and nifchas she'ena makabelis rov haregel. You had a piece of leather that was stripped away, removed from the sandal in such a way that he can no longer put most of his foot into the sandal, the minal, and walk with it to protect his foot. Ubesmichas hayodayim. If a person cannot walk on his feet, but rather he walks on his hands, picks up his body with his hands, and just simply drags his feet. And then he puts on gloves on his two hands so that his hands should not get dirty and soiled. Anfilia shall beged, and hacholetzes minak aton. In all the above cases, chalitzasa psula. So you see clearly from the Brisa that there's a fundamental distinction between anfilia or where the chalitza is kshera, as opposed to anfilia mi beged, where the chalitza is psula. So this Brisa is a support for Rav. Gemara now asks a kasha on this Brisa that we brought to prove Rav. Kav hakitea. We said in the Brisa that the chalitza is kshera in a case of kav hakitea, even though we said the kav was made out of wood, not leather. Mani, who holds that the definition of minal includes even eights, even something that's made of wood? Rabbi Meir. That's none other than Rabbi Meir. Just now we learned to the Mishnah in Shabbos. Mishnah gives us a list of those articles of clothing that you're allowed to wear in Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos, and it's not considered that you're carrying a burden. Hakitea, someone who's an amputee, Yotzei Rosh Hashanah, he's allowed to go out in the public domain on Shabbos b'kav shelo, because that kav is actually serving as his shoe. And apparently, even though it's made of wood, still called a minnow. Divrei Rabbi Meir. So if you ever see the traditional Dutch attire from, hundreds of years ago, they still do it today a little bit. They wear, these wooden shoes. Rabbi Yossi Omer, he says, no. On Shabbos, a kiteh is not allowed to go out in Rosh Hashanah because if it's not made of or, then it's not a minnow. And if it's not a minnow, then it's carrying. And Rabbi Yossi derives this from a pasuk, V'enolecha tachash. So it's not called a minal unless it's made of leather. Therefore, kitea ragil lelechas bekav shelo v'zo minalo. But nevertheless, it's not called a minal to allow you to go out within a Rishus Harabim unless it's made of or. So now we have a little bit of a problem. Why? Because the ratio of this brisa that a kav kitea is kosher lechalitza reflects the sheet of Rabbi Meir. So that means that your definition of minal is expanded to include even something that's not or. Now we get to the seif of the brisa. Ban pilya shel beged, and the chalitza is psula. That goes according to the Rabbanan. And the Rabbanan hold that a minal that's not made from or is not considered a minal. And they derive from the pasuk that we mentioned earlier, ve'enalecha tachash. So we have a kasha in this brisa from the Reisha. The Reisha says that a kavakite is kosher lechalitza, even though it's made of wood, reflecting the sheet of Rabbi Meir. But the Sefer says that amphiliat shel beged, which is not made of or, is psula, which reflects the sheet of Rabbi Yossi. Amar Abaye, the Sefer Rabbanan Reisha Nami Rabbanan. The Rabbanan derive, as we said earlier, from the pasuk Venalech Tachash, that it's got to be a minnow of or. And the Reisha also reflects the sheet of the Rabbanan. And once again, the Reisha's machshir, the kava kita, even though it's made of eights, for chalitza, it's fine. And we add b'mechupa or, that on the outside appearance, this kav has to look like it was made of or. It's actually only mechupa or. But once it's mechupa or, that's kosher. It's considered a minnow. So according to Abaye's interpretation, the entire brisa from beginning to end reflects the sheet of the Rabbana, that minnow is dafka min or. And we're going to have to add that in the Reisha, the case of Kav HaKitea is Mechupa Ba'ar. Amalei Rava says to Abaye, according to your Shita, that the Reisha, this Brisa, that was Machshir, a Kav HaKitea, is talking about Mechupa Ba'ar. It was covered by leather. Volume implying Ena Mechupa Ba'ar Mai. Apostle, the anfilia is considered disqualified for chalitza if it's not mechupa bi'ar. Ihachi adatoni safe. Why did the safe have to stretch its arm out to passel up an anfilia shel beged liflag v'lisnibidi da, even within the Reisha, to make the distinction and say when is chalitza bekav sheira babedvar bamurim Shecholza bekav hachalitza kshera is b'mechupa ar. Aval ein mechupa ar pasul. So this kav, if it's not mechupa liar and it's made of wood, is not kosher chalitza. And I have here an additional note. He writes, Bekach lo nitel v'nomar, should make the following mistake, that the reason why Anfilia is psula for chalitza is because it's made up of a very soft kind of garment, which does not really protect the foot. And a minnow has to, at the barest minimum, it has to protect the leg. So in the case of kava kitea, even if it's not mechupa or, it still could protect the leg, and therefore it should be kosher l'chalitza. That's a very logical deduction, but it's wrong. And in order to exclude such a mistake, the Brisa is going to differentiate between kava kitea that protects whether it's mechupa or eina mechupa or, as long as it protects the foot. And we'll understand that the difference between the Reish and the Sefer is because of the pasuk v'nolech tachash, that a minnow that's exclusively dedicated to R, it's really asu bi R. Is kosher. And even if it's protective of the foot, but it has to be made of ore. So let's just review Rava's objection to Abaye. Abaye wanted to interpret the entire Brisa, the Reish and the Sefer, in the light of the Shitas Chachamim that you must have ore. And the difference between the Reish and the Sefer with regard to Kav Hakita is the difference between mechupa ba'ar and not mechupa ba'ar. So Rava takes him to task. He's saying that liflog v'lisnei b'lidah. Why did this Brisa have to stretch its arm out in the Sefer to disqualify Anfilia shall beged? Even Anfilia shall ar would be possible unless it was mechupa ar. If it's eina mechupa ar, then it's disqualified from chalitza. So therefore, Rava says the following: Elam or Rava, the Brisa doesn't distinguish in the Reisha or the Sefer regarding kavakitea. This Brisa does not reflect the Shita Rabbi Yosef, and therefore we're going to interpret the Brisa be the Reisha Rabbi Meir, Sefer Nami Rabbi Meir. The Reisha clearly is Rabbi Meir, who's machshir kavakitea for chalitza, even though it's not mechupa biar. So we're going to have to introduce the Shita Rabbi Meir, that even without or, it's considered minal. He doesn't have the drush of an alech tachash, which includes only or and excludes anything else. So now that we're caught sort of in a bind, because if the Reish is Rabbi Meir, then the Sefer should likewise be Rabbi Meir. And that would mean that in the Sefer where the chalitza of Anfilia is excluded, it's psula, so that would have to be Rabbi Meir. And the reason why kavakitea is considered a nal and it's kosher chalitza, and Anfilia is not considered a nal, and it's possible chalitza is for a different reason, and that is high mogain high low mogain. The kava kitea, even if it's made of a substance other than or, in this case AIDS, nevertheless it protects the leg. That gives it the status of a minal. But high, the amphilia that's made of cloth, low mogain, it doesn't really protect the leg, and therefore it's excluded. It's not called a nal, because a nal requires that the bare minimum to mogain ala regel. Omar Meimar, Haiman de Cholitz, the Yavam when he's doing chalitza. Tzarech lemitchase lekare, he should push his foot down so that now the Yavam has to exert a certain energy force to pull off his minal. So you can imagine a situation where a person is wearing a minal, but it's loosely like hanging on his leg. That's not chalitza. Didn't we learn in a brisa that the chalitza is ksher bein omed, bein yoshev, bein muteh? Now, the Gemara is assuming, Rav Ashi here, that when a person is muteh and he's leaning over to the side, then he's not capable of pushing his regel, his leg, down, like into the ground. And yet the Brisa says the chalitza is chalitza kshera, even in the case of muta. So it seems that we should derive from here that you don't need, in the case of yibum, that the yavam push his leg dafka against the karka. And that's against Hamema. So Gemara answers, Ema uliolam dedochis likare. That when the Brisa was machshir, chalitza, in the case of muter, where the yavam is muter, that's a case where be ofen chedochefes raglo b'karka af she'ein darko oz lidcho. So we're qualifying now the case of muta. Muta is not just a case where he's not, even though he's muta, he's got to be dochefes raglo b'karka. Omar Beimar, Haiman de Mazge. Mazge means to walk. Al lichasa, to carry. Instead of standing on the bottom of his foot, he stands on the top of his foot. Like a magical act. Lo chalitz. That's not considered chalitza. Now, I'm not sure why. I have two possibilities. Either because when the Torah requires chalitza, you need to take the nal off his foot, and here it's upside down, so he's not really taking it off his foot. Or perhaps this is not the normal way that you wear shoes, and that itself, in and of itself, would disqualify the chalitza. Amalei Rav Hashi, La Meimar Vatanya, we learned in a brisa, Smochos or Raglayim, that a person who can't walk on his feet, he walks on his hands, and he drags his feet from the karka in order that the feet should not become filthy. And already we saw in the previous brisa that you need machnis raglov l'socha in order to generate a chalitza kshera. And here he's dragging himself on his hands, and his feet are not inside my lav to cholitz ihu. Shouldn't we assume that when the brisa was machshir, smichas raglayim, right, where the foot was covered by the shoe, the cholitz ihu, the person who's dragging his feet, he's going to do the chalitza. And even though his feet are now what we'd say krum, they're akum, but nevertheless the chalitza is kshera. So we see clearly that a regel is considered a regel, whether it's straight or curved. So therefore, even a regel afucha, even if it's upside down, it's considered a regel. So how could you, Amemar, maintain the position that hafucha is lo chalitz? The pashup shot in this price is smochos, haraglayim, right? When you propel yourself with your hands, and the feet are dragged along, is the chalitz be'iyu, right? The person who is dragging his feet, he's doing the chalitza. And even though his feet are sort of distorted, they're still kosher for chalitza. So we see that a distorted regel is considered a regel and it's kosher l'chalitza. So therefore, even a regel hafucha, which is upside down, is nikres regel. More answers. Look, the Bryce is not talking about a case where he's dragging his feet and he himself is the choletz. That would be a chalitza psula because it's not cholza hanal me'al ragla. Basically, it's the regel itself. I mean, the regel is not a minal. When the Brisa says it's kosher, the yoyev lahu liacher v'choletz. When the amputee relies on his smuchos haraglayim, after he walks on his raglayim, like any other person, and it can be choletz. So Gemara says, Omar of Ashi Lamai Kamar Meimar, that a person who has these upside down shoes can do chalitza. Lav bar uba chalitz, v'lav bar kipov chalitz. These are two individuals who have raglayim shenishapchu, and therefore the chalitza is not considered a chalitza. The Mishnah says minar kuva lamata. If Nebuchadnezzar had an amputation of his regel from the knee and below, then his chalitza's kshera, uramini, on the pasuk shalosh regol tachal b'ashana, that is my beis hamikdash. They would go up to the mikdash on 3 regolim. Leiros be'azara, and it says regolim, right? Shalosh regolim tachal b'ashana prat lebali kabin. So only a person who can walk up to the Harbayis in his feet, he's considered the Baal Kabin. He's going to fulfill the mitzvah of Shalosh Regolim Tachogli Bashana. Pratla Bali Kabin, this is the exclusion of someone who Nebuch has had his regel amputated, and he puts like something that looks like a regel, but it's made of wood, and it becomes a base kibel, that whatever stump he has, he puts it into that base kibel. Is these Bali Kabin up Turim from Aliyah Regel during the Moed? And even though they have a shok, which is the thigh, but nevertheless they're excluded from Raglayim. So we see clearly that when it's Nikta or Raglo, Lamakum Eberch, it's below the knee, then already it's not considered a regel. So why does the chalitza, in the case of Nechtucha regel Lamakum Eberch, we said the chalitza is kshera? And it's as if he was choletz mi regel hayovam. And the Gemara answers, Shani hacha dichsiv, v'cholza nalo me al ragel, in the Parsha of Yibum. And the Torah doesn't say v'cholza nalo mi raglo, it says me al raglo. What is the extra word me al coming to teach? That even if the chalitza was from the thigh, which is me al raglo, it's ksher. So Gemara says, "Ihachi lamala min arkuva nami." Why do you passel his chalitza if he was amputated even above the knee? Why not apply the same logic that you applied below the knee? And the Gemara answers, me'al raglo, velo me'al de me'al raglo. So the shok, which is called the thigh, is me'al de me'al raglo, because the bottom part of his foot is raglo, up into the knee is called me'al raglo, but then we get to a higher level of me'al raglo, which is the thigh. So it's me'al raglo, velo me'al raglo. So that's the difference between lemata me'ar kuva and lemala me'ar kuva. Amar papa shmamina, from the fact that the Mishnah validates in the case of kitea, if the amputation was up until the knee, that's considered me'al raglo, and the pasuk is being marba that chalitza is valid. Hi, we can derive from this that isteriva, which is a bone that connects the thigh and the regel, ad ara nochis. It reaches all the way down to the karka. Hainu, what does this mean? She'etzem hakarsol ve'ha etzem shel parsas kaf regel etzem echon. It's one bone that goes from the top to the bottom. The isal kedak mifsuk pasuk, if you can tell me that the karsol is a bone unto itself, And in the kafa regel, he has another bone. Havile iu. This karsul is me'al raglo, because he's basically above the regel, the kafa regel. So again, let's go over this. The Isa Mifsuk Posik, and a karsul is a bone unto itself. And therefore the bone of the kafa regel is also independent. Is Havile Iu, this karsul is me'al ragel, because it's me'al etzem kaf haregel. Bishoka me'al de me'al. And it's only the upper thigh above the knee. That's called me'al me'al. And that's going to undermine the chalitza, because the Torah says only me'al ragel, but not me'al ragel. Omer Avashi, afilu tema mifsek osik, even if you'll tell me that this etzem, this bone called karsul, is mifsek posik, it's not one continuous bone that ends in the kafa regel. Nevertheless, the chalitza is kshera. And this is included in what the Torah was machshir, me'al raglo, kol de bahadi kare, kikari domim. Any part that's connected to its regel, like the karsul, it's not considered me'al raglo, but rather kikari domim. I don't know, he doesn't translate the word kare here. Do you have such a translation?
Car is like foot. I think
A
it's
foot. But he's saying this is not considered above his foot, but rather the foot itself.
Like it's level. I think it's saying it's level with the foot, is like the foot. If it's level with the foot, it's like the foot.
And what is he referring to? Does he have a name for this karsul in English? What's the name of this bone? I don't have the English.
He does. Yeah, he's got the knob of the tibia.
So he has like a kind of a Latin name for it, right?
Well, he's saying the ankle bone does not rise higher than the upper.
The ankle bone.
Yeah, we call this the ankle. He's saying that the protuberance, the thing that sticks out, is called the ankle. And that's the ankle is the knob of the tibia. So the ankle is not above the foot, but it's part of the foot itself.
Okay. And therefore it's like choletzes meregel atzma. So we don't need a ribui that the Torah, when it said me'al raglo, is coming to include the ankle, because the ankle is an integral part of the regel. So therefore, we can use me'al raglo to be machshir the shok, because that's the next part going up the foot. That's kosher l'chalitza. In our kuva lamala, if the regel of the oven is cut above the berech, then the chalitza is psula. Mosiv Rav Kahana, and Rav Kahana asks from the klolos in Parshas Kitavo, and it says there that haraka bechav aguna va'anuga tera ena bivna ubebita gdol b'shel yasa, which is her children, her small children, hayotzeis mibein regla. That even though Havlad, the child, is yotze mibein hayirechayim, and it seems from this pasuk that Mibein Ragleha means that even the Yerech is considered regel, so we should be machshir the chalitza even if the cut was above the berach. And the Gemara answers, Amar Abaye, no, it doesn't prove anything. Why? B'shasha koras lele. We're talking about a woman who's about to give birth. She's in labor. And no etzes akevea v'achosev violedes. And she sort of digs in her heels into her thighs, and she gives birth. So that's called a vlad hayotze mibein raglel. Marias toshma lo asa raglov v'lo asa svamo. Right? The pasuk says that he did not remove the hair of his beard, meaning his lower beard, and he did not remove the mustache. Now, from the language of lo asa raglov, it indicates that even the thigh is considered the regel. And the Gemara answers that the yerech is not considered part of the regel. The pasuk calls it raglov, lo asa raglov. It means that since it should have said lishna ma'alia, it should have used the Torah wanted to use a lashon ma'ula unikia. Toshma vayavo Shaul haser es raglov. And this would also imply that the thigh is considered part of the regel. And where it is lishna ma'alia, again, the yerech is not part of the regel, but the Torah wanted to use a lishna nikia. Toshma ach mesech hu raglov, which means that he's oseh mei raglayim. B'chadar hamekera, that's up in the attic where it's cool air, but it seems that the yerech, the thigh, is also considered regel. The Gemara answers lishna ma'alia, the same answer. We're going to have this over and over again. Bein raglea, and here the pasuk is talking about Sisro when he came and he had a relationship with Yael, and the Gemara answers lishna ma'alia. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Sheva Pilos Bal Osa Rasha Sisro Biosa Yom Es Yael Shenemar Bein Ragleha Kora Nofal Shacha Bein Ragleha Kora Nofal Ba'asher Kora Shom Nofal Shodud. Each one of these Lishonos is indicative of Be'ilah. So the Gemara asks, why is the pasuk laudatory to the extent that Yael is called Tevorach Minoshin because she allowed Sisro to have a relationship with her in order to tire him out, and so she'll be able to kill him? Isn't she enjoying the Avera? Doesn't she get pleasure from it? And the Gemara answers in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Tovasan shal tzadikim ra hi etzel, Tovasan shal rishoyim is ra hi etzel tzadikim. You wouldn't consider it something beneficial or pleasurable for the tzadikim.